We're joined today by members of our Standards Committee. The committee is ultimately responsible for the PRCA's governance structures, our codes of conduct, and also our complaints procedure. The aim of today is to give some more detail on the consultation and really just to encourage you to submit a view. He'll give a brief overview on why we have decided that the time is right to review the code. We'll pass to Emily, who's also on the Standards Committee, to give a bit of background on the development of the draft that we're consulting on. And Carol, who'll take you through some more of the detailed provisions in the code. It should take about 25 minutes to go through, and then we'll start our panel discussion, which Iain will chair. So during the Q&A session, please pop in any questions that you have in the chat, and Iain will ask our panel to answer those questions as well as they can. We aim to finish about 11 o'clock, and yeah, hopefully we'll all go to time. So let's start with our panel. So Iain Christie, who's a barrister mediator. Iain is going to act as the facilitator for this event and assisted by two other members that we've mentioned, Carol Westrop, who is a lay member, solicitor with extensive experience in professional regulation, and Emily Fermor, who's head of public affairs at Hanbury and also chair of our public affairs board. So without further ado, I'll pass over to Iain, who will give an overview on why we have decided that the time is right to review our code.
Thank you. Thank you very much indeed. Louise, can I just check that you're sharing your slides, your screen, so that people can see what we're going to be going through this morning? Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to this roundtable discussion as part of our consultation on the proposed new code for professional lobbying. As we said, it's being recorded, so to those of you who are watching this recording on the PRCA's YouTube channel, I hope you will find it informative and that it will prompt you to participate in the consultation if you've not already done so. So just by way of background, the Standards Committee was set up as part of the PRCA's governance review at the beginning of last year. So we are a relatively new committee, and our responsibilities under the PRCA's Articles of Association are to set the standards for members of the PRCA under their two codes of conduct, to determine the procedures for dealing with complaints under those codes, and then to decide upon any complaints and impose sanctions if there has been a breach. So as I said, the PRCA, as you probably know, those of you who are members, has two codes of conduct, a general one that applies to all members, and then one additional code which is specific to those who conduct public affairs work. So to that end, during the course of last year, we conducted a review of the existing general code of conduct, the one that applies to all members, both individuals and company members, and that came into effect last summer in July 2024. So that sets out the ethical standards that apply to all members, common standards that you would expect to see in any code of conduct, for example, to act with honesty and integrity, not to mislead clients, and to act in a way where there's a conflict of interest, that kind of common standard. So at the same time that we did that, we substantially revised the procedure for dealing with complaints to make sure that the processes were clear and fair and proportionate. And that new complaints procedure is also on the PRCA website, and that applies to making complaints under either code. So the code of conduct, which we've already revised, the general one, and breaches of what is currently called the Public Affairs Code. So it's the same procedure for making complaints under both codes. So after that piece of work was completed, we turned our attention to the existing separate code for public affairs, which is the subject of this consultation. And as many of you know, this code sets out the standards that apply to members who undertake public affairs activities, which are essentially activities aimed at influencing government or advising clients on how to do that. This is often referred to as professional lobbying, and that explains why we're proposing to change the name of the code for public affairs to the code for professional lobbying. That's one of the suggestions that came out of the call for evidence. So our aim broadly is to ensure that any new code covers the right framework to ensure there are ethical, fair, and transparent behaviours. But whatever it's called, it will essentially cover the same ground as the old Public Affairs Code. So there's a number of reasons why the Standards Committee decided that now was the right time to undertake a comprehensive review of the code. Firstly, because it hadn't been reviewed for over a decade since the PRCA adopted it, and obviously a lot of things have changed in the last 10 years. The code duplicates many of the provisions which you will find in the General Code of Conduct or other legal requirements. So we've tried to streamline it to remove any duplication. And it became clear to us on the Standards Committee over the course of the last year or so, from questions that were raised by members, from members of the public and other external organisations, that some of the code's provisions are unclear, difficult to understand and to apply in practice. So that's why we're undertaking this review now. The final thing I want to say is that the Standards Committee has a majority of independent members. That's to say professionals from outside of the PR and communications industry. That's how you end up with a barrister and mediator as chair, a solicitor as vice chair. So we're experts in regulation, in standard setting, and good governance. We've done similar work for other organisations to set professional standards in their industry. And generally, that's standard practice now in most regulatory bodies where you have either an arm's length regulator or an internal regulator, if you like, such as you have with the PRCA. And the purpose of that is essentially to ensure that the industry is not marking its own homework. But that means that we are heavily reliant on the PRCA members through its voluntary committees and through the wider membership, such as many of you who are on the call today or watching the recording, to make sure that the standards we propose are the right ones. So it's what the industry and the wider public feels are the appropriate standards, because obviously, ultimately, this is all about public confidence in the PR and communications industry. So we want to make sure that we strike the right balance between the various competing interests, but also impose standards that are pragmatic and practical to apply. And those of you who are in the industry will know what those need to be. So to make sure we have the right people involved in this review, we set up a subgroup of the Standards Committee with the Public Affairs Board to consider these issues and how the review should be carried out. And that's why we're now coming out to you, the members, to seek your views as well. So I'm delighted that Emily Fermor, who is a practitioner, an industry expert, and is also chair of the Public Affairs Board of the PRCA, is here today, and she's going to give a little bit more detail about how we've conducted the review so far. Emily, over to you.
Brilliant. Thanks, Iain. And yeah, as Iain said, the Public Affairs Board has been an important consultation partner, providing that industry expertise and understanding, working very closely, informing and advising the Standards Committee on this process so far. And I wanted to make a particular shout out to Jess Daniels-Roberts at Hanover, who has led the working group for our Public Affairs Board and has worked really closely with Carol in particular and the Standards Committee as a whole on the process so far. It's worth saying that the board itself has a mix of members. So we have in-house practitioners, we have those who represent larger agencies, those that represent smaller agencies, and it's important that we get a kind of diverse range of opinions. We also, whilst we are kind of a representative group from the membership. It's so important that you as members respond directly to this consultation process, and it's really important that we hear your views too. So I'm just going to quickly cover the kind of context that lobbying operates in, the regulatory context, and then go on to the kind of consultation process so far. So on the context, so look, most of you will be really familiar with this, but just as a quick overview, as you'll know, self-regulation forms part of the bigger picture of regulation around lobbying in the UK. So consultant lobbyists receive a certain amount of oversight from the statutory regulator, the Office for the Registrar of Consultant Lobbyists, which is a mouthful, and we call it ORCL as a shorthand. And this only applies to a narrow section of lobbying activity. So consultant lobbyists who communicate with a UK government minister or permanent secretary level on behalf of a third party in return for payment. It also requires that consultants who conduct this lobbying activity adopt and adhere to a professional code of conduct, of which ours at the PRCA, alongside the CIPRs, are two of the most widely followed. The PRCA's voluntary self-regulatory code of conduct, therefore, sets out additional standards that our membership who do this type of work must comply with. So this is also in addition, as Iain set out, to the standards required for all members of the PRCA in the general code of conduct. So relevant members who conduct public affairs or lobbying activity are required to declare to the PRCA certain information every quarter. So this includes their clients, who they've acted for in that time period, and that is then published on a transparency register, which is public and available to all. It's also just therefore very important that the PRCA's code on this issue provides standards which help ensure that professional lobbying is conducted ethically and transparency, and that those who fall short of those expectations are held to account. Our starting point really is that clear, transparent, and ethical professional lobbying plays an important part in our democratic process. That should be acknowledged and indeed celebrated. Clearly, there have been some high-profile cases of lobbying practices, including most recently around the employment of peers, that's put a spotlight on what is and isn't included in the code, or what should and shouldn't be. So we had started this process before some of those things were discussed in the media and in the public domain, but they've really heightened the discussion around that, which we encourage, and we do address that through this consultation. So on the consultation, in order to help inform our approach, we started with an initial public call for evidence, which was issued in December 2024, so December last year. That sought views from anyone. So it was a public open process, and it sought views on the content and how the code, the Public Affairs Code as it was then, worked. We received 17 responses to that initial consultation, and we're really grateful for everyone who took the time to reply. The majority of those responses were from organisations operating within the industry, but we did also receive a number of personal responses from individuals and other institutions. You'll find a detailed summary of these responses in Annex 1 to the consultation document. And there were 6 key areas that came up, including the name, the activities in scope, the issues of MPs and peers in employment. All of this information could be found on the website alongside the consultation document itself. We used those views along with other evidence to inform and prepare the new code, which is we are proposing, we call the Code for Professional Lobbying. So whilst I might slip into calling it the Public Affairs Code, because that's what I'm used to, and we are consulting on a new name for professional lobbying. And hopefully most of you will have seen this and had a chance to consider the new code that's being proposed and consulted on now. But in case you haven't, I'm going to hand over now to Carol, who take you through some of the key points.
Thanks, Emily. Right, I'm going to take you through a couple of slides, just setting out some of the main provisions in the new draft code that we're consulting on. As I think Iain has said, please do take the time. If any questions occur to you while I'm doing the presentation, please put them into the Q&A boxes, which you'll find at the bottom of your screen in the taskbar. And then when we get to question and answer questions, we can pick up those and try our best to answer them. So firstly, what was our general approach to looking at the Public Affairs Code and how we would approach any potential review? First of all, to explain, I think we've made this point very clearly already, but the Public Affairs Code at the moment sits alongside the broader Code for Conduct, which applies to all of the PRCA members. So the intention is that the PA code, the code that we're consulting on, sets out additional requirements. And because of that, we've taken the chance to remove any duplicative requirements in the PA code and to streamline it. For example, there was a reference to a requirement that members must comply with the Bribery Act. Well, that should be self-evident that you need to comply with legislation, and that is also reflected in the new Code for Conduct that came in, as Iain said, in 2024. We've also tried to consolidate provisions where they were perhaps scattered through the existing PA code or contained in definition sections that were elsewhere, such as the register requirements. So all of this means that the code we are proposing will contain 8 rules as opposed to the existing 21 in the current Public Affairs Code. We think a concise and more focused code should be easier for our members and the public to understand and apply. But the reduction in number of rules, I just need to make this point very clear, isn't intended to be in any way a diminution or reduction in the standards that we expect our members to comply with. In fact, what we are proposing in some places do strengthen the existing requirements. So the fact there is a reduction number should not be taken in any way that we are reducing the high standards that we require from our members. If you're interested in understanding in detail how the provision in the existing Public Affairs Code translates to the Code for Professional Lobbying that we're consulting on, you'll find what we call a destination table in Annex 3 to the consultation document. And this sets out a very brief overview and summary of where the existing 21 rules have translated into the current 8. So if you want a quick overview of how things are positioned, I would encourage you to have a look at Annex 3, which again you'll find on the PRCA's website. And finally, before I get into the detail of the actual standards, as both Emily and Iain have said, we have proposed a change in name of the code to the Code for Professional Lobbying. Now, we asked for views about this in the call for evidence, and whilst we had some mixed views, most were in favour of a change. Our options were, as now, in the current PA code, trying to narrow down the definition of public affairs to make it fit with the code's purpose, or instead broaden out the definition of professional lobbying so its context is broader than perhaps members of the public might understand by that narrow term. Both options would have worked, but we generally felt that the latter approach and a new title would make it clear what the code is intended to cover and be clearer to members of the public about what we're trying to achieve. So turning now to the detail of some of the provisions. We've got some new definitions. So as you'll have seen, we've proposed that along with the new title that we're going to have a new definition of professional lobbying, and that is now in the body of the code itself rather than a separate standalone definition, which is the current position. And the current definition, I should say, is public affairs activities. And although the essence is unchanged, as Iain referred to, it's both dealing with activities intending to influence those making public policy decisions. We have slightly extended, in our view, strengthened some aspects. So the first one is in the definition of what influencing might mean. We've included some activities that were previously excluded under the definition, which were mainly 2, responding to an invitation to submit information or responding to a government consultation exercise on behalf of clients. We believe that these types of activities would normally fall within the public's expectation of what professional lobbying involves, as the intention is really to try to actively influence government policy. We also believe, and we've checked this throughout, that those who are providing returns to our register wouldn't already probably include this type of work in their returns. So extending it to that limited extent should not be burdensome for our members. The existing PA code defines those within scope of our standards as government, which is then intentionally broadened from what the public might assume is government. As a lay member, I would think of the current Labour government, but obviously the intention is that it's broader to cover, for example, opposition MPs. We asked for views in this in the call for evidence. And as a result, and there was generally in favour of the general scope, but perhaps some clarifications around what was a rather difficult to understand reference to public authorities within the definition of the Human Rights Act, to the new term relevant public body. So that is essentially the same sorts of activities, so MPs, peers, central, devolved government and local government, but includes a more broader term, a more precise term really, to bodies exercising functions of a public nature, rather than a reference back to the Human Rights Act. And we are proposing that we should include special advisors, as that is really a new development that's happened over the last 10 years, and their important role in influencing government policy. I should also add that we've removed the reference to MEPs because post-Brexit, that's no longer an issue. Then the next big topic I just want to touch upon is this question of employment of MPs and peers, which Emily's already briefly referred to. Most of you will know that we presently prohibit the employment of MPs and peers and their equivalent in the devolved legislations by PRC members who undertake professional lobbying, and that's currently in Rules 9 and 10 of the current Public Affairs Code. These also prohibit the payment of money and awards and other benefits in kind that might be seen to be influencing decision-making in that way. We know that some consider employing peers, in particular to do advisory work, has given rise to concerns, and Emily touched upon that, about undue influence and lack of transparency. And as many of you know, there's been a lot of public debate about it in the press. The views expressed to us directly during the debates have reaffirmed that we do need to consider carefully here what the right standards are to require of our members in this area, balancing the right to work with the importance of public confidence in lobbying in our government institutions. The issue is particularly relevant to peers. As you know, Parliament rules generally prohibit MPs from having a second job in which they provide parliamentary advice. This is not the case for peers, although there are some restrictions that apply, for example, to ex-ministers. So we've set all of this out in a new draft Rule 4 of the Code, which we believe should continue to prohibit members from employing peers, MPs and their equivalent, to undertake professional lobbying activities as we now define. Now, this position was strongly supported by members of our responders to the call for evidence, and we consider this should continue to apply to both working and non-working peers. We've also proposed that we extend the scope of those within this prohibition to include non-executive directors of government departments, given the likely perceived and actual influence that they have on decision-making. However, another option that we have been considering and discussing would be to prohibit our members from employing MPs and peers and their equivalent in any capacity. So if they, the member, undertakes professional lobbying and therefore falls within the scope of the code. A clearer prohibition might avoid ambiguity about what is, for example, sometimes called strategic advice or strategic support that might be given by someone otherwise in scope, and enhance public confidence in professional lobbying. However, we do appreciate that this stricter rule significantly extends the current prohibition and might be considered by some to be disproportionate. So for the purposes of this consultation and to show you what an alternative provision might look like, we've set out in italics in the draft Code for Lobbying, which again is Annex 1 to the consultation, how this option might look. And we are particularly interested in views on this, any issues or concerns that you might have, and any comments on the drafting in particular. In both versions, we have continued the prohibition on the payments of awards to MPs and peers, as we feel that these obviously weaken the prohibition about employment and providing benefits that might lead to perception of undue influence. But we have made it clearer that we aren't concerned about payments that are for reasonable expenses, such as travel or their equivalent. So very briefly, some other main changes. We've rationalised the existing provisions in Rules 12 and 13, which deal with the separation of a member's professional and private life and the roles they might have outside of their work, into a wider rule requiring the avoidance of acting in effect where there's a conflict or a perception of a conflict of interest, which are now set in Rule 7. And we're going to make it clear that our company members have to provide access on training to their code to their staff, which is now in Rule 8. We think it's important in this slightly complex and difficult world that often members, and particularly new starters, operate in, that they understand their obligations. So after that quick summary of the new code, I'm going to pass to Iain, who's going to chair our question and answer session.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much, Carol, for that comprehensive review, and also to Emily for what she said. We've got just over half an hour left, so this is where we want to hear from you. I'm afraid it's not one of those sessions where you can actually come on and speak and we can see you, but please do put your questions in the Q&A. And if you wouldn't mind also, please just saying who you are and if you are, what your organization is, what role you hold, just so helpful for us to know the context in which you're asking your questions. To be clear, we will take everything that's being discussed today into account in the consultation, but we're not intending this to be a substitute for you submitting your own responses in writing to the consultation. So please do that as well if there are points that you want to make. And you will see that Louise has kindly posted in the chat a link to the press release, which is on the PRCA's website. And if I direct you to the bottom of that page, you will see all the documents that Carol has been referring to. So not just it's in the form of a MailChimp survey, the questions that we're asking you on the code, but all the background papers, the responses to the call for evidence and our views on them, the guidance on how to complete the consultation and our thinking process in why we've proposed the clauses that we have proposed, plus that table of destinations that she referred to. So for those of you who are particularly interested in it, please do read all that detail, because we spent a considerable amount of time putting together what we hope is very useful information that will inform your responses. So with that, there is one question already in the Q&A, which is very topical, because I happened to be listening to an edition of the Naked Week last week. Some of you may follow that. I think 2 weeks ago they had an item on our consultation, the PRCA's consultation that we're discussing today, and this topic arose in their episode last week. And the question is this: what about the question of employing people who have a parliamentary pass, who may no longer be MPs, but still have them as they're entitled to them? So I know that this is something that the codes of conduct which apply to MPs and ex-MPs speaks to, because it prohibits ex-MPs who, as the questioner rightly points out, is entitled to retain their pass. It prohibits them if they're working for a lobbying company. And according to the item I heard on the Naked Week, there are currently 87 ex-MPs who work for lobbying firms or consultancies. It prohibits them from lobbying on the parliamentary estate within the grounds of the Palace of Westminster. So I suppose the question for us, and I'll probably see who wants to pick this up for Emily or Carol, is do we need a reciprocal kind of prohibition in our code, is there something that is not picked up in respect of these particular individuals? So these are ex-MPs who have parliamentary passes. Who would like to?
So in the current code, it's prohibited to be conducting professional lobbying and therefore be named on our register and hold a parliamentary pass. So that is in the current code. My view is that that's an important provision that should remain.
Carol, did you have anything to add?
Yes, I was just going to add, that's absolutely right. We asked for views on the call for evidence on this, and again, overwhelmingly, the view was that ex-MPs and peers should not be entitled to retain and use their parliamentary passes if they're involved in professional lobbying. So the new rule we are proposing, which is very much a reflection of the existing rule, is that members must not hold a pass conferring access to the Parliaments of Westminster, devolved legislators, not accepting this is wider than just the House of Parliament, but also the Senate and so on, or associated departments or agencies. So it's not holding a pass. In exceptional circumstances, permission may be granted for a member to hold a pass, and that decision would be taken by the Standards Committee based on the evidence as to why that might be considered to be exceptional. And if we do decide that it is exceptional, then we are intending to be for transparency and accountability that decision will be published on the RCA's website, so that people are aware that a PRCA member has a pass that entitles them to access the parliamentary estate, and people know that that's transparent. So in essence, the current prohibition, which we think is right, is being retained, but is being slightly brought up to date, is to reflect, for example, the role of the Standards Committee in decision making.
Thank you, both of you. So that actually goes further then than the equivalent in the MP's Code of Conduct, because they are entitled to retain the pass, providing they don't carry on lobbying activities within the grounds. So thanks for that clarification. Another question. If the consensus from the consultation was that the proposed clause 4 was disproportionate, would the current clause 4 be retained? So I'm assuming from that the question is referring to the italicized version, the alternative, if that was regarded as being, although straightforward, clear, simple, if that was catching instances where no harm was actually going to arise, would the current clause 4 be retained? Carol?
Yes, sorry, Iain. Yes,
I caught you on the hop there.
Yeah, no, you didn't actually. I was just thinking I'd perhaps need a sip of water. Yes, you're absolutely right. The stronger version, which in essence we are suggesting might prohibit MPs from being employed by our members, current MPs and peers or their equivalent, in any capacity. If that isn't found eventually when we've gone to the consultation responses and considered the matter internally to be the right standard that we want to bring into effect, then the alternative is the first option in the current Rule 4 in the draft, which essentially replicates the current position with some minor changes. So it's essentially that our members cannot employ MPs, peers, to do professional lobbying as we've now defined, which is in effect the same standard, although the current standard obviously refers to public affairs activities, which is a little bit wider or a little bit perhaps less clear, shall we say. Actually, we are proposing that it be slightly strengthened. So yes, in effect, we are suggesting that the current position is maintained. We are including in that some additional requirements, such as you can't employ a non-executive director of a government department, and that is something that we are proposing, because I think they are more common than as I understand it, than they were previously, and the people who do this are often in a position to influence public policy decision making. So we've included that as well as an additional matter. But essentially, yes, I think that's a very long-winded way of saying that the person who asked the question is right in their assumptions.
Yeah, I mean, I think just broadly on sort of, responses to consultations, I mean, I think generally they're always helpful and they guide, but ultimately, obviously, the PRCA would make the final decision on what should be in the code. Because, inevitably, it's a small number of you, those who are on this call, maybe watching the recording, and those who submitted responses to the call for evidence, that are particularly interested in this. It's a small number compared to the overall membership. So we just have to take what the feedback that we get from the consultation. That's why we're doing it. We're going to be informed in our final decisions by what we receive, but I'm not sure that we're necessarily going to be bound by it. So, I mean, that is just kind of general practice in terms of when you carry out a consultation. So I hope that answers that question. I will go to the next one in the list, and then I see that there's also one in the chat. But let me go to the next one from James Bolton Jones, who I'm taking, James, you are not a professional in the lobbying industry, but you're more of a journalist. Spotlight on corruption. It's great to see the proposals to strengthen the code, for example, to include SPADs. I wonder what the PRCA's view would be on the commitment by the previous government to establish a central register of government transparency data, including meetings, gifts, and hospitality, published monthly, which the current government appears reluctant to take forward, having just set up a register of gifts and hospitality, but excluded meetings data. So, James, thank you so much for your question. Obviously, you have a lot of knowledge. You're following this closely. Which of you, Emily or Carol, would want to respond to that? Emily, as we go to
I can take that initially, James. I mean, I would say that I don't think the PRCA has a settled view on this, and would be interested to hear members' thoughts. My general view is that it's important that the government consistently follows its own standards and expectations before increasing the level of detail that it will be declaring. So I do think we've had an improvement under the current government in regularly making those declarations on time, consistently. But I think in the past, what we have seen is some quite big differences between departments on the types of things they are declaring or what they consider to meet the current threshold. And so whilst I don't think we have a settled view on increased transparency, I would say that as a general rule, it would be great to see the government consistently adhering and applying the current transparency rules across all of the departments.
Okay. Anything to add, Carol? No, I will move on to.
Yeah, I think I'll just add there that obviously we've looked at in depth as part of the research we've done for this project the recent parliamentary subcommittee reviews of the Lobbying Act 2014. I've forgotten the long title, but you know the one I mean, and the suggestions that they made in relation to strengthening things like declarations. And I think for my part that obviously there are two sides to this coin. I mean, the PRCA is very committed to ensuring, as far as it can with its members, high standards, transparency, and so on. And I know that having a voluntary code which members subscribe to is a very important part of that, and that was acknowledged by the parliament. That support for codes of conduct. Not just enforced, but also enforced where necessary if there are serious breaches of it. So it's good to see the government supporting. I'll leave others who work in the industry to comment more widely on the other suggestions that parliamentary subcommittee made and how those could be brought into force. But certainly from the PRCAs and the Standards Committee, we are very committed to make sure that those standards are appropriate standards that are in place.
Thank you. Thank you, Cara. Just to point out, you'll see a name that's appeared on our screen as a fifth member of the panel. Gabriella is part of the PRCA's comms team. If you don't know, she has helped set up this roundtable today. So it's not an attendee who's managed to inveigle their way in onto the screen. And Louise, also do feel free, if you feel there's a question that you have something to add, please do come in as well. In fact, on this one, I know that we have been having some discussions about this. So Liam Herbert has asked, do you have any examples of what may be considered exceptional circumstances to hold a parliamentary pass? So this goes back to the conversation we were having just now on when it would be appropriate for an ex-MP who is now employed in a lobbying capacity under our code, under the PRCA's code, to be given in exceptional circumstances of pass. I mean, what I would say, Liam, is that we are certainly, well, as Carol said, if they are granted, there will be a statement to that effect on the PRCA's website. So there will be transparency about it, which I don't think there was before. And there will obviously be an explanation insofar as we are able to say why. So, for example, I do know in the past, I believe, this probably predates our time, but for example, if a member of parliament has a child who's attending the creche, or for some reason has a particular reason why they need to be driven into the estate, they may, for example, be given a pass for those specific purposes. Now, it may be that information in relating to any individual would be regarded as personal data, and it's not something that we would be able to give much information about, but we certainly intend to identify when any exceptional circumstances have applied. Does anybody want to add to what I've said as to the kinds of examples? That was one I can recall in the past, but whether that would be counted now, I don't know. It will obviously be completely fact specific on the facts of an individual case. Emily?
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good explanation, Iain. And I think that the thing that I would point to is that these are exceptional circumstances. We do scrutinise very we do scrutinise in detail. We have a very kind of long dialogue with the individual, and we stress test as a public affairs board and as a standards committee whether it's believed that passes the test and is truly in exceptional circumstances. And one of the things that we keep in mind is if this was permitted in a certain case, would that enable that individual to have undue access, or would they commit kind of lobbying, or would they do lobbying on the parliamentary estate? That's quite a key criteria for us making that decision. It's not taken lightly, and it's not something that's granted very regularly. But that's the only addition I would make to what Iain's described.
Yeah, thank you. And Liam's pointed out quite rightly that his question doesn't just cover ex-MPs, it's anybody, any member of former member of parliamentary staff, anybody who has a pass to Parliament. So thanks, Emily. I don't see any other questions in the Q&A, but please do put something on if you'd like to. Yes, Louise.
Hi. Somebody's just sent one through to me, so I'll just pop it in the chat. It's there.
We have to register with ORCL. Will they approve this new code? So I'll go to Carol first on that one.
Yes, it's a good question, because although my understanding is that although consultant lobbyists who register with ORCL, there is no obligation under the Lobbying Act for them to follow a voluntary code. The Act says if they if they do, it has to be named on the register. And then the register has to be satisfied of various things about the code. And they strengthened this quite recently with some new guidance, so that it must, for example, relate to the lobbying industry and be relevant to what they're trying to deal with. For example, that it must have a complaints procedure and it must enable some sort of outcome if it's breached. At the moment, Orkle have decided the existing public affairs meets their criteria, and obviously we will be engaging with them to make sure that the new code that we are proposing, as and when it's brought in its final form, is also meets the criteria. But it is, I personally can't see any reason why it wouldn't meet the criteria, because we've checked it through and it ticks the boxes, as it were, that they require a code for professional conduct to meet.
And I think we have been in touch with ORCL, and although they're not wanting, for obvious reasons, to actually participate in the consultation, I know that they're watching it very closely, and I'm sure if they had any issues, they would let us know if they felt that for any reason it wouldn't be approved. So I think what Carol has said is right. Anybody want to come in on that or anything else? We do still have a quarter of an hour. There's plenty of time for more questions if you want to pop them in the Q&A or in the chat.
Iain, I just wonder if
Yes.
the Standards Committee could talk a little bit about additional guidance, the plans for additional guidance, just because at the moment with the current code, we get a lot of questions. I know that the real purpose of the code is to ensure clarity with the new code, and I'm just wondering if there'll be something on top of that. So if you could talk a little bit about the plans.
Very happy. Yeah, very happy to talk about that. No, Louise is absolutely right. I mean, inevitably, a code of conduct sets out some fairly high level principles, and the devil is always in the detail, and people will have questions. Well, how does this apply to the facts of my particular case? If I do this, will it be in breach or will it conform? So what we are intending to do is to issue alongside the final version of the code for professional lobbying. And obviously we can't do this until we have the final version following the consultation. Some more detailed guidance dealing with the kind of question that Liam just raised, perhaps giving some examples of things that would be in accordance or with one of the provisions, and maybe factors to take into account to avoid being in breach. Obviously, what any guidance needs to do is avoid effectively committing to deciding any particular complaint in advance. No standards committee can do that. So it will only be guidance. I personally, and I know Carol has been as well, been involved in drafting other codes, and the guidance usually runs to 5-10 times as long as the code. It's a lot more information that's in the guidance, and it will take some time to develop. So it may not be that the guidance is issued at the same time as the code comes into effect, which we're hoping will be this summer in July, but certainly within a few weeks or months from that, because obviously it's of interest to everybody to make sure that they understand what the provisions are intended to mean. So I hope that is sufficient. If anybody, Carol, do you want to add anything on that?
Yeah, I just want one quick thought that if I think in the responses to the call for evidence in the documentation that Louise has pointed you to, we have highlighted a few areas where we think guidance might be helpful. And those are sort of areas where we get perhaps some questions or issues or questions raised by members in particular. So if anyone has any views about the areas of guidance, having read the draft code for lobbying, that they think would be helpful for us to look at or to prioritize, I think that would be very helpful for us to know. And there is, as I understand it, there's a sort of general text box in the responses to consultation where you can you can just free text box where you can put your suggestions in that. So I think that would be helpful to us as a committee if you had any views as to what areas might benefit from some further guidance. We're going to, obviously, when we've got the code finalised and approved, we're going to rationalise the sections on the website. We've got some existing Q&As and some existing guidance, and obviously we will look at consolidating all of those to make sure they make sense and they fit in with the new code. But any views on this, I think, would be very welcome.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. And also just to add that, things like guidance documents evolve, and, they will be updated in the light of actual experience. So sometimes if you have a complaint, it's actually a beneficial thing because it may result in some clarification, through an actual worked example of the facts of a specific case will help to clarify how things in the code will be interpreted. So over time, you can expect there to be further, more specific guidance as we get more experience of how the code applies in practice. Okay. Well, I am not minded to just drag this out if there are no further questions. We do still have time for anyone who wants to quickly come in. Louise, you have another one?
We just have a question from James Bolton-Jones in the Q&A.
Another one, James. Sorry, I missed that. Thank you. Do panelists have any thoughts on how the new foreign influence registration scheme will interact with the work of PRCA members in the new proposed code? Right. I'm going to have to defer that to someone who knows about the foreign influence registration scheme.
Yeah. I'm happy to tackle that one.
Please, thank you.
So the foreign influence registration scheme, we have been engaging with the Home Office on this with some of our members, and we have attended some of the pilots that have been taking place and feeding into that piece of work. It's an area that's still being developed, although the government have committed to carry that forward. So I think time will tell. I think a lot of the new procedures contained within FERS are things that our members who act in this area are already compliant with. I think it will be those agencies and organisations who do lobbying who do not comply to a code, either because they don't need to, because it's not covered under the 2014 Act, or because they're not one of our members. So I think that's as far as our thinking with that, and we're watching this space really closely to make sure that we're keeping track of that.
Thank you, Louise. And James, it is so helpful to have your input because people who have the wider experience, who are not within the world of professional lobbying, but have a broader perspective. I mean, you have a valuable contribution to make to this, to make sure that we're taking everything that we need to take into account. So, thank you for drawing that to our attention. Okay, well, unless there are any further questions, I think probably we will draw this to a close. We've got 5 minutes till the end of the hour. Louise, do you want to just put up the final slide and I can just talk to the next steps? So after this call closes today, what I think we will be wanting to do is take everything into account that we receive from the consultation. So that doesn't close until the 28th of April. So you have over 3 weeks still to submit written responses to that consultation. And as I said earlier, I do hope everyone on this call will do that. Really appreciate the fact that you've taken time out today to participate in this event, and your opinions will be very gratefully received. So please do consider submitting something. The form that the link goes to in the press release is a very simple one, which just has a few questions and all the links to the documents. But please don't feel constrained just to respond to the questions on the clauses that we've asked. If you have more general questions like James's, any other observations that go wider than the questions we've asked, please put them in your response. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that once the consultation closes at the end of April, we will produce a final version of the code, taking all of the information we've gathered throughout, not just this event and the consultation responses, but any further research that we may have done, take that into consideration, and then publish a final version and a summary of any comments that we have in response to any of the consultation responses. We'll put that on the website prior to the new code coming into effect, once it's been approved at the PRCA's annual general meeting. So the timing for that will be approval of the final version of this new code at the PRCA's AGM in June. So until it's formally approved by the whole membership of the PRCA, it won't come into effect. And then at the same time, we will publish our responses and explain why we've ended up with the version that we've ended up with. And then all being well, that will then come into effect in July, which means we'll obviously have to update the website with the new version. And as soon as we can, in addition to providing this guidance we've been talking about, actually provide some training. So the PRCA is, I know, fabulous with the amount of training opportunities it provides to its members. And so there will be training provided on the new code for professional lobbying, just as there is currently training on the new General Code of Conduct run internally for members to help you and your staff understand the changes that have been made. So as Carol said earlier, if you have any thoughts on what sort of resources, what kind of guidance, what type of training that would be helpful to you, please let us know. And we will obviously review those and update them as we can. So I think that all that remains for me to do is to thank everyone again, our panelists, to Carol and to Emily and to Louise, and also to Gabriella for setting up this roundtable today. And a special thanks to all of you who have participated and asked questions in today's event. Thank you again, and I wish you a very good day.